Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
On this episode of the Sumud Podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify presidential candidate Dr. Cornel West. He is known as a philosopher, author, activist, actor, recording artist, and public intellectual. But he is so much more than that. Because if you ever get the honor of spending even a single minute with him, you'll realize he's a man of faith whose spirit radiates love and empathy, deeply grounded in a profound sense of ethics and justice. That's why I quickly came to know him with deep affection as Brother West. He's our brother in the quest for freedom, not only for Palestinians, but for anyone who faces oppression, injustice, or marginalization around the world. Shout out to my sister, Zaina Sharawi Hutchinson, for introducing me to Brother West. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you watch or listen, and follow us on social media at either Sumud Pod or Sumud Podcast. Brother West, welcome.
Brother, it is a blessing. I'm telling you, a deep blessing to be in conversation with. Of course, we salute Brother Wise. You all make quite a wonderful team, though, man. Indeed.
Indeed, I appreciate that. Wise is amazing. So, it's interesting. As I was preparing for this interview, I got to be honest with you. It's just one of those interviews where I just want to sit back and listen to you, Brother West. Like I just want to be a student and have you almost ask your own questions. But let me tell you, the one thing I want to just point out, because I was sort of thinking about you at a younger age, was that fact that you refused to stand up for the American flag when you were much younger. And A, would you describe that story? And B, is that the first time that you've actually resisted, if you will, against the empire?
Good God Almighty, it's a wonderful question. No, I have to walk down the yellow brick road of my memory to recover some of those moments, though. Because, the first thing I recall was my mother, who was 2 years old when her mother was 31 years old, and she pulled her teeth and started to bleed. This was in Crawley, Louisiana. This is in Jim Crow, Louisiana. And it wouldn't stop bleeding. They only had one black doctor in the whole town. He was on vacation. So they took my mother's mother to the hospital. It was a Jim Crow hospital. They wouldn't allow her in. And she died on the steps of the hospital, 31 years old. My mother was 2 years old. That's how vicious and sick and pathological white supremacy is, and it affects people in a lot of different ways. So when I recall hearing that story, it just generated a level of rage and righteous indignation inside of me. And I was very, very young. I had then heard about a great granduncle who was lynched and he was wrapped in the U.S. flag. That was in Jim Crow, Texas, right outside of Orange, Texas. My grandfather was run out of Crawley because he got a shotgun. He's a deacon in the Baptist church. He got a shotgun because he was going straight to some folk out. They dragged him, ran him out of town, and he ended up in Orange, Texas, where my mother grew up. And then she had stepmother, T. Rose, who helped raise her later on. And it was there where I heard about my granduncle who was lynched, and he was wrapped in the U.S. flag. So when I was young, I associated the U.S. flag with that lynching. And so there I was in Sacramento, California, the chocolate side of town, in Camellia Elementary School. And the teacher's telling me to salute this flag is the best thing since sliced bread. And I said, no, that flag stands for something else for me. And so when I didn't do it, she hit me, I hit her. And then, we had a little Joe Frazier, Muhammad Ali moment, which I'm not really proud of. I don't like that, to be hitting folks, especially hitting the women like that. But I was very young. I was 7 years old. I got kicked out of school. No school would take me for 2.5 months, which was another challenge because, mom and dad putting the stress on education and no school taking you because you're out of control with aggressive behavior, transgressive behavior. That was a challenge. But those are some of the early memories of really just bearing witness. It was more a matter of my love for my mother and seeing her shed those tears than it was just being against something. You know what I mean? I'm not the kind of person who was primarily just against evil. I try to be for good and God. So that the againstness is a second moment. People look at me and say, oh, you're an anti-racist. No. I love Black people. I love Palestinians. I love indigenous peoples. And I'm therefore anti-racist because I'm against any behavior that somehow treats Black people, Palestinian, indigenous people, anybody else as less than human. So it's always this sense of a force. So that's like your radio show is a force for good. It's not just against evil. It's a force for good. So it embraces contra evil, but it goes beyond that because you got some wind at your back. You're not a parasite on a host. You got wind at your back with your family, your tradition, your community, all this blood, sweat, and tears poured into your heart, mind, and soul. That's what's that force for good. And of course, that's the language of the great John Coltrane. How to be a force for good. Love supreme. Way of being force for good.
Do you think many understand the nuance there that you just presented?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to say. You know, we live in such a flattened out culture of addiction to and distraction, which is driven by titillation and stimulation, usually short-term pleasure. That tends to be a superficial way of being in the world. And when you have superficial ways of being in the world, you tend to be just anti something because it's a titillation of going against rather than a deep grounding and a deep caring and a deep nurturing that allows you to go before something.
Yeah. And I want to talk more about your parents, if that's okay. I know you were born in Oklahoma.
That's right.
Raised or spent most of your time in Sacramento. I believe even there is a school after your mother's name, if I'm not mistaken.
That's exactly right. Irene B. West, my brother.
Yeah, you can't beat that. To have a school named after your mother, I just got to ask, how proud are you of that?
Yeah, shoot, I don't have a language, brother. I do not have a language. I can show you. This is what happened at the funeral, you see.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was just 3 years ago, but she's strong as ever. She's still very, very operative in my life. So much of her afterlife is at work in my life, but she's also got her soul in another and better place. But you're right. You don't really have words to capture what it means to have someone who loves you so unconditionally and unapologetically from birth to her death. That's a gift that it just goes far beyond even the imagination. It really does. When I heard Sister Harris the other day talk about the greatest privilege in the world is being an American, I said to myself, God, how idolatrous, how narrow and truncated. The greatest privilege in the world is being loved and being able to love. And that's true whether you in Gaza, whether you in like Lagos, whether you in New York. When you see in the face of the most vicious genocide that's ever been put on public display, and you see in the eyes of those children and the men and the women, and some of them still with victory signs, and you say, God, they can't crush the love. They can't suffocate the love. They can't eliminate the love at all. Under those conditions, you see. Now that is what privilege is at its deepest sense. Even in the midst of genocide, there's that sense of dignity. There's that sense. Now I could take you out. I'm in Harlem right now. I could take you right outside of New York, where the richest of the folk walking around with no joy, no deep soul, vacuous in heart, and yet living large.
Yeah.
You see, I mean, the humanity is gone. And there's an attempt to eliminate the humanity of Palestinians. And here's just unbelievable resilience, resistance. We continue to step with a power and a prowess that the whole world cannot deny. You cannot deny. And I say that because I think that's true for oppressed people that are at our best anywhere. But right now it's crystallized in Gaza and the West Bank. And it's a spiritual and a moral thing, even given the vicious settler colonial expansion and the vicious imperial policies and the weaponized hatred and the organized greed and the militarized genocide and ethnic cleansing and apartheid-like conditions that we're seeing on television every day.
When did we lose humanity? I mean, when I was growing up, we always had this sense of belief that humanity was out there, that especially within the Western sort of frame of mind, that it's out there, we're here for each other. But if you're in Black America, if you're a Palestinian, if you're a Muslim, whatever you may be, you're realizing that humanity, was it never there really for a lot of people in the society?
Well, there's always been the best and the worst inside of each and every one of us, but every empire, it's been about 70 empires in the history of the species going back to Africa. The United States is number 68, and every empire is predicated on some form of barbarism. Tells lies about itself, to hide and conceal its barbarities and try to keep it underground. Like United States vis-a-vis indigenous peoples, genocide took place there. And then, of course, it's enslavement of my own Black people's unbelievable lack of humanity. Average slave dying at 27, every generation for 244 years, sexual violence, rape taking place daily, acting as if they're not just less than human, but at the same level of as that of other non-linguistically speaking animals. So that's always been there. It really has been. You got thinking of millions killed in World War I, many more millions killed in World War II. I think it's almost 50 up to 150. I mean, it's unbelievable. And yet that's the worst. That's the wretchedness of who we are as a species. The wonderfulness of who we are as a species is trying to be forces for good. Push back greed, push back the hatred, push back the fear, push back the envy, push back the resentment. And then when it comes to structures of domination, predatory capitalism, imperialism, white supremacy, male supremacy, and so on, that you just have to have a cloud of witnesses every generation, my brother, to try to tell the truth and bear witness to justice. Very much so. But the West, I think, it has to bear a heavy responsibility, because in the last 600 years or so, it's been the West that has had a disproportionate amount of power and wealth in reshaping the world in its image. Prior to 1492, other empires were more powerful. China and other places, they had their forms of barbarism. They had their forms of resistance. But since late 15th century, let's say 1492, when Columbus encounters indigenous peoples, when Jews are expelled, Moors are expelled out of Spain. Spanish Empire was one of the major empires, if not the preeminent empire of the day, alongside the Portuguese Empire. But as you know, and I know, empires come and go, man. Spanish Empire is gone.
Yeah.
Portuguese Empire is gone. British Empire, gone. Ottoman Empire, gone. Austro-Hungarian Empire, gone. The American Empire, one day, will be gone. They come and go, and usually they begin to collapse owing to military overreach, massive corruption of the elites, undeniable powerlessness among the citizenry, who scapegoat the most vulnerable rather than confront the most powerful, and you end up with tyrants, and those tyrants are unable to reproduce any of the best of what came before, and you get to internal collapse, or you get an external takeover from folk coming in, as was the case with the Roman Empire. So that we have to be just very honest of where we are. What's distinctive about our moment is you got ecological catastrophe and nuclear catastrophe as a very near possibility, and these dynamics of empires coming and going. And our question becomes, for us, well, what kind of armor do we have? what structures of feeling and values in light of the stories that inform us do we have? And religious traditions are very much traditions that tell us stories about ourselves, that get us to relate to powers greater than ourselves, so that our narcissism and our hedonism do not become the major sources of our motivation, but rather a love and a mercy and a compassion and a genuine empathy and justice ought to have a crucial role in terms of how we define ourselves in light of a history of unbelievable greed and hatred and domination.
So religion isn't the issue. It's the people practicing the religion or manipulating the religion to fit their narrative. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. I mean, religious traditions have been in some ways the grandest gifts to and the grandest enactments of the species. That's precisely what Moses and Jeremiah and Esther, and Jesus and Muhammad, or Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or Fannie Lou Hamer, all these are profoundly religious people, deeply religious people, And I just mentioned, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's three. But I mean, we could talk about Gandhi, or we could talk about Bell Hooks, my dear sister, who was Buddhist, who I love dearly and I miss her deeply. Every religious tradition has this institutional form. And the institutional form tends to quickly adapt to empire. So the history of churches and mosques and synagogues, dominant history of adapting the empire in order to survive. But then they go back to the Quran, you go back to the Bible, or you go back to Hebrew scripture. You say, well, wait a minute. One, was supposed to be not afraid. Two, we're supposed to believe that there's no God other than this one God. And three, we're supposed to practice justice and mercy. Now, if you take those seriously, you find yourself going against empire, going against forms of oppression, going against forms of domination. So what's magnificent is that these religious traditions, on the one hand, they're tied to these institutions that too quickly accommodate themselves to powers that be, but they produce peoples who are critical of forms of evil, of forms of domination, of forms of oppression, of forms of hatred, of forms of envy. And therefore, they're pitted over against the worst of the species and try to enact the best. And keep in mind, this is a war that's taking place on the battlefield of our own souls. See, when we talk about greed and hatred, we ain't talking about just people over there. We talking about something inside of us. We talk about fear. We talking about something inside of us. Well, what breaks fear? Well, love does. Well, then the question becomes, do you love folk enough? You see, and of course, that's the question we have with these cowardly politicians. That is to say, we know, in fact, that if a genocide were taking place and Africans, Black people, or Arabs, or Muslims, or Palestinians, those particular peoples were the peoples who were producing the genocide and treating people in the way Palestinians are being treated today. The response of the U.S. government would be the opposite. They would never allow Palestinians to treat Israelis the way Israelis treat Palestinians. Just like they'll never allow in America Black people to treat white people the way white people treated Black people.
Right.
Never ever. See, that's the racist element. But it's a racist dimension that has to do with whose life really has value. Which one do you really care about? And if, Biden and company, they really do care about European lives. He gets very upset when you got these world caregivers who get killed But he can't say a mumbling word about the thousands and thousands of Palestinian babies or men or women. And that just shows you that, oh, you really just so tribal. You got a very narrow pool of people you care about. And see, that's something that has not been adequately accented, it seems to me. I say it in every speech because I can't stand, I have no patience whatsoever for people who think that Black lives, or Palestinian lives, or indigenous people's lives, or Arab lives, or Muslim lives don't have the same value as other people's lives, you see. And I would say this about Jewish brothers and sisters too. There's no doubt about that. If this were happening to Jewish brothers and sisters, I would still be upset. Now, Biden would be upset if it was Jewish lives. He would be upset.
Yeah,
I'm upset too for moral and spiritual reasons. But with Palestinian lives, not upset at all. And based on the policy, don't give a damn. That's true for Harris. It's true for Biden. It's true for Austin. It's true for Blinken. It's true. We can go right down the line. Miller, all of them. Their whole policy is predicated on the notion that we don't have to really care for Palestinian lives. No, not at all. Israel has a right to defend itself. Do what you have to do. We're so sorry that there's some collateral damage, but we're thoroughly convinced that Israel has never violated international law. Can you imagine anybody even thinking that thought, given the realities? But they said the same thing about Black folk and lynching laws. Why did it take America so long to pass a law against lynching? They passed it in the 21st century. They started lynching folk in the 1860s because they didn't give a damn in practice. Whatever little pretty language they had, they didn't give a damn in practice, because if it would happen to them and their families, oh my God, this is a level of criminality we can't describe. But see, that's the kind of thing I have no patience for. But as a Christian, I try to make sure that I'm consistent and I'm constant. And so I'm concerned about all oppressed people across the board. And that's not just a moralistic gesture of rhetoric. It's something you have to be willing to live for and die for. And of course, as a Christian, that's what Jesus says: deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me.
Yep.
And I can imagine Muhammad saying, if you are serious about Allah as the only God, no other God beside the Allah, beneficent, merciful, and requires of you to be not afraid, do justice, and make sure you are a neighbor, not just treating your neighbor right, but you are a neighbor to your neighbor. That means you got to be in solidarity with people suffering around the world, struggling around the world, oppressed around the world.
That's why I love when you said in one of your interviews, I'm not running for president, I'm running for justice.
That's right.
That's just so powerful. I've never heard anybody frame it that way with great sincerity. So I wanted to thank you for that. I think that's extremely important.
Thank you. And as you know, I could have gone further and say, I'm running for Jesus. But I can't run for Jesus. Follow Jesus into that temple. Remember, that's why he was crucified. He went into that temple and ran out those money changers. There were 300 imperial Roman troops guarding that temple. And his closest partners, his disciples, abandoned him. A few days later, Peter, who was his best disciple, would deny him 3 times. He goes into the temple, overturns the table, and they say, this man is a criminal. We got to take him to jail. And he did it not because he hated the rich. He hated greed. He hated avarice. And he hated poor people suffering. And so you say to yourself, okay, well, what does it mean to run for justice, run for Jesus, run for Muhammad, run for Allah, run for love, run for compassion, run for overcoming any form of oppression? And it might take the form of running for president. You can run for dog catcher. you can run for city council. You can run for whatever you run. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All of us in some sense running. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. So a deep question I think only you can answer from a global perspective. So I'm Muslim myself, and I sort of know that this is all happening for a reason. For us, God has a plan. Everything will be fine at the end of this. We will get justice at the end. But from a philosophical perspective, why are we going through this? We're seeing innocent kids lose their limbs, murdered, decapitated, mothers and fathers being murdered, families being separated. How does anybody make sense of all of this?
I don't think you ever have a theoretical or rational resolution of the catastrophe of evil. I don't think there's such a thing, that there's no way that our human minds could grasp the ultimate sense of this kind of unbelievable penultimate suffering. So for me, one reason why, that God becoming Jesus on the cross cries tears, because there are these divine tears that looks at human beings and say, look how you treat each other. Worse than Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel on steroids, mediated with new technological toys and instrumentalities. See, but I give you this free will, and exercising free will, you can choose good, you can choose evil, and we often do, in fact, choose evil, and that's exactly what we see. So that you're right. I mean, I was just reading Sister Julian of Norwich, one of the great English mystics, latter part of the 14th century. She said, all of my theology, she wrote this book called Showings or Revelations of Love. And she said, all of my theology can be summarized in all shall be well. Very much. All will be well. All will definitely be well. But I have no understanding of how I can't, there's no way I can work that out. All I'm called here to do is to bear witness and be true to this love that's been made available to me, and therefore be a follower, a disciple, Christian like myself, Jesus, or Muslim, what it means to really be a follower of Allah, taking seriously the Quran and what Muhammad was trying to say, and so forth. And I think that's the best we human beings can do. I don't think any of us have any kind of ultimate understanding or find ultimate sense in it. It's a faith and a trust that we have, but it's manifest in what we think and do now, given our fallibility, given the fact that we are limited, given the fact that your blessed and beloved mother and blessed and beloved father came together, and there you are. And the same is true for me, but we all have our limitations as well as our grand possibilities.
So when we say run for justice, do you believe, and I'm thinking Obama here in this as an example, do you believe he thought he was running for justice and the very system that he was running against actually corrupted him?
No, I think Obama decided a long time ago that he was going to be highly successful. And he conflated success with greatness. That he wanted to be professionally successful. He wanted to be politically successful. But moral and spiritual greatness requires much, much more than professional success and political success. And in being successful for him, it always meant traveling in the middle lane. You see this all the way back to college, accidental, Columbia. You see it at Harvard Law. He always wants to be in the middle lane. He wants to be popular. He wants to be everything to everybody. And he doesn't ever want to take a stand where he has to go radically against anything and take a deep, deep risk. He wants to be successful. It's like being a musician, you start playing some music and everybody's buying your music. And you know that it's superficial. You just go on and keep making it because you want to make money. You don't want to be true to yourself. And I think early on, I think that he had an appreciation of Martin King, Malcolm X, Fannie Lou Hamer. He had an appreciation, but he said, no, I'm not ever going that way. because I'll never be successful that way. Well, you see, when Allah calls you, when God calls you, the criteria is not worldly success, ever. If there happens to be a worldly success, it's as a byproduct of your calling, which is grounded in a moral and spiritual excellence, a moral and spiritual greatness that has to do with love, courage, compassion, mercy, no fear. Love, breaking that back of fear again. And this is true for most politicians. I mean, to be a politician is to say, I know I'm in a system of legalized bribery and politicized larceny and normalized corruption. Everybody knows that's what politics is all about. And if that's all it becomes, and you just try to negotiate it inside of it, then no matter how successful you are, you still fall short. It's like being in a rat race. Oh, I got to win the race. I got to win the race. If you're in a rat race, the winner of a rat race is still a rat.
That's right.
Still a rat. Well, I'm out front. Well, what race are you in? If you're running for justice, I see that the people you're concerned about are not out front. If you're concerned about justice, then the precious Palestinian brothers and sisters and children, they're not winning. I don't care how successful you are. They're not winning. And a spiritual and moral criteria of greatness is I'm in solidarity with those precious folk because they're being unjustly treated. They're being viciously attacked and so forth and so on. They're being lied about. They're being criminalized. And their cousins are the ones who are not in Gaza. The Arabs and the Muslims around the world being associated with just being terrorists. And yet you can have U.S. leaders supporting terrorism around the world in Iraq and Afghanistan, American leaders in the history of this country, the indigenous peoples and black folk. Nobody ever calls them terrorists. No, not at all, not at all, not at all. So that I think Brother Obama just completely confused success with greatness. And you see Gangster Trump, he tries to come back and use greatness, doesn't he? But what is his definition of greatness? Domination, conquering, manipulation, marginalization, oppression. He's got to hate on folk all the time. Oh, these immigrants, nothing but gangsters and so forth. Well, how long you been here, Trump? Well, my family got here in the 1920s. Your father was a German and your mama was a Scot. Is that right? Oh, I see. So you've been here since the 1920s and my people been here since 1619, but somehow you are more American than me. Are you losing your mind? And of course, I mean, he's able to lie with no accountability, over and over again. But it's just pointing out the unbelievable hypocrisy and mendacity of those who pose as if they have authority. You have no moral authority at all. That's true for U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah. I have a friend, an African-American brother that I've known for many years, close friend, staunch ally of the Palestinians, always standing side by side with us.
God bless him. God bless him.
But when Vice President Harris decided to run for president and Biden stepped aside, this friend in tears came to me and said, I'm sorry, I can't vote against a black woman. I don't have it in me. I didn't know what to say. What should I have said?
I would have said that in the name of your precious grandmama, in the name of your precious mama, in the name of your female black cousins, and in the name maybe of your daughters, if you have, or maybe he's old enough like me to have granddaughters, great granddaughters. I said, in the name of those black women, did they teach you, did they pour into your heart, mind, and soul that you should support any black woman? Did they teach you that gender and skin pigmentation is all you need to look at when you judge and assess somebody? No, they didn't teach you that. Take him back. I don't know if he's Muslim or Christian or secular. Take him back to how he was raised. Wasn't raised like that.
Yeah.
Not at all. So you say, it's a beautiful thing to see a talented Black woman ascend to high places, and people must take notice of her. So now the question becomes, what does she stand for?
But do you believe that they put her in this position to divide and conquer sort of the Palestinians?
He was selected a long time ago, going back to the DA in San Francisco, that the whole system was in the process of selecting certain folk and certain Black folk to ascend. But she also chose. And she's also very excited about it. She said the greatest story in the history of the world is America. Please, have you heard of a story about Jesus? Have you heard a story about Muhammad? Have you heard a story about Buddha? You don't think those stories are greater than the story of genocide and conquering and enslavement and efforts for liberty and efforts for freedom? There's some wonderful things about America. There's some wonderful people in America. But the American story is not the greatest story. She's choosing to be selected to be used in that way. So that, for example, you go back to your friend and say, well, she had policies where she elected to keep some Black brothers and sisters in prison rather than release them because the prison system needed cheap labor. Now, what if your first cousin was one of those brothers and she's a Black woman that got enough power to let him out? She decided not to let him out because she wants a sense of cheap labor. Do you still support her because she's a Black woman and you feel this deep association, identification with her? Because, of course, we all feel identification. Palestinian, yeah, you know what I mean? You get a Palestinian brother who wins the Olympics, it's like, yeah, shoot, this is a wonderful thing. We don't even know what his politics are, but yeah, we see a Black brother win the Olympics. My God, this is magnificent. We see Prince on the stage moving and grooving. Oh, yeah, that's a part of me. But then you discover, and they also support genocide. What did your mama teach you? What did your grandma? Now, I don't say father and grandfather because I'm just talking about Black women in this case.
Yep.
So I understand the identification. There's no doubt that that's real. But if that's all you have, then you're actually letting down the Black women who have given so much to you. That's what I said to you. That's what I was said to your Black brother. And God bless him, because it's a struggle. Now, he could come back and say something like, well, Brother West, any of these candidates who's against genocide, they're not going to win. And I want to go with a winner no matter what. And I think Trump is such a gangster and a fascist that if he wins, everything's going to be worse. That's a plausible argument. I'm not persuaded by it, but it's a plausible argument. And then you say, oh, well, I say that. So do you think then that Trump's fascism is something that will go away? Do you think that sooner or later the fascism is going to take over no matter who's in office if you don't tell the truths about the situation and if you don't make some distinction between supporters of genocide and those who don't support genocide? Do you think the Democratic Party, which has been pushed so far to the right when it comes to immigration, when it comes to foreign policy and a host of other things, won't end up doing similar things as it tries to steal Trump's thunder year after year and election after election? And that's a larger discussion. It has to do with the larger argument. So, but it's true. I mean, in my own campaign, we had very wonderful Black folk who were supporting me. And as soon as Sister Harris came out, they left. I said, I thought you all were committed to something deeper than skin pigmentation. And well, there's no way I can go against a Black woman. No way I can go against a Black woman. He said, well, good God Almighty, you got to draw a distinction. A Black woman is a human being like anybody else who stands for certain things and refuses to stand for certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's hard to get at the morality and the spirituality if the racial identity is somehow trumping both of those. So you don't even want to think about them in any serious way. Or the other argument that I get from a lot of Black brothers and sisters is, oh, Brother West, we see like yesterday you out in New York for 3 hours marching for the Palestinian cause, and I don't see the Palestinians marching for the Black cause. I want to see reciprocity. I want to see mutuality. How come you and the others are always doing this for them, and I don't see them doing this for us? I say that I can appreciate the question, but first let me tell you one thing, that you never for right try to be a force for good just for quid pro quo. This is not transactional. I don't go to try to be in solidarity with indigenous peoples to make sure that to the same degree indigenous peoples are in solidarity with Black people. Something's wrong and you take a stand. Then you have the honest dialogue with the brothers and sisters, whoever it is, and say that it is true that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Justice is indivisible. And in fact, yes, the Palestinian brothers and sisters should be even more part of struggle against police brutality for Black people and mass incarceration. And there have always been a significant slice of Palestinians who have done that. There's histories of that. No doubt about that. But there should be more. But there should be more Black folk bearing witness against Palestinian oppression, you see.
Yeah.
But again, it's a matter too often of people saying that in order to somehow not want to be challenged or questioned. So they just go off, with a Harris or Obama or whoever it is. Very much so.
So when I met you out in Dearborn, I don't know if you remember, the first thing I said to you was, I'll never forget your letter of resignation to Harvard.
Yeah.
Was that in 2021? I believe that
it went that was maybe 2019, maybe
19, maybe. Okay,
like that. I can't remember.
For me as a Palestinian reading this, and I just want to summarize it really quick, a couple key parts. To witness a faculty enthusiastically support a candidate for tenure and then timidly defer to rejection on the Harvard administration's hostility to the Palestinian cause was disgusting. This kind of narcissistic academic professionalism, cowardly deference to the anti-Palestinian prejudices of the Harvard administration, and indifference to my mother's death constitute an intellectual and spiritual bankruptcy of deep depths. Boy, that spoke to my heart. I don't remember ever reading that from anybody. I don't remember, and I could be wrong, but I don't remember anybody standing up for us in that way, other than Edward Said, other than Malcolm X. Dare I put you in that category?
Well, no. Of course, Brother Edward is my very, 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 very dear brother. I was just looking at one of his classics, Covered Islam, on the critique of the media, still at work today. Still true today. It's 1981, 1979, the question of Palestine, and 1978, of course, Orientalism is classic. But I could tell you this, though, that one of the grand honors I had at Harvard was both being the faculty advisor for the Kuumba Singers, which is Black gospel singers, and being the faculty advisor of the Students for Palestine, for Justice in Palestine. And in the latter group, it was so difficult for us to ever find a room just to meet, just to have dialogues and so forth, you see, because there was no concern about the discrimination against Palestinian students. And that for me was something that was but it's part and parcel, because I go back to the 1970s, whatever, we were having teachings on Palestine in 1980, 81, of course, 82 with the vicious invasion of Lebanon and so on. Things began to really, really peak. And so I've been blessed to be at it for 42 years in this regard. But it became clear to me at Harvard that, you had folk who were in charge of tenure decisions, ensuring that no voice critical of a vicious Israeli occupation would ever be tenured. ever be tenured.
Mm.
When I was tenured at Yale in 1984, I was a university professor at Harvard in 1994. University professor, that's 22 professors out of 2,000. But when I come back to Harvard, there's no tenure. And when finally they go and bring me to tenure a second time, they say no. And I said, well, how could this be? Yeah, well, I met the academic criteria years ago. I could go to any other places, which I had, and I left right away, as you know. I said, but it's very clear this is anti-Palestinian activity going on here. And it needs to be called into question, and it reveals a level of spiritual and moral and intellectual bankruptcy that people need to know about Harvard, because Harvard has a great tradition of W.B. Du Bois and Edward Said, PhD, in 1964, under Harry Levin, who was a Jewish brother, who was his thesis advisor, complete. Harvard's had a great tradition of truth tellers, but Harvard's got deep complicity and accommodation to lies, crimes, domination, oppression, and we need to tell the truth. Now, the very motto of Harvard is veritas, the Latin for truth. Really? That's your motto, Harvard. Well, let's tell the truth about yourself. Let's tell the truth about your refusal to take truth seriously, especially when it comes to Palestinians, Black folk, indigenous folk, and others. And that's what that letter in part was about. I was just blessed to be able to come to where I am now at Union Theological Seminary. But I had to struggle with Harvard. You remember under Larry Summers way back in 2001. And it was a similar thing. It was a very similar thing. And in both cases, the presidents happened to be Jewish brothers. They happened to be Jewish brothers. And they were just so tied to their own perceptions and their own prejudices and their own presuppositions that they didn't want to allow somebody like myself to be there and flower and flourish.
But you had the courage to do it. And many people at your level don't have the courage or haven't showed that courage. What's your message to them?
Well, I mean, everybody ought to be true to themselves and true to the best that's been put inside of them. But you would think that the best has something to do with courage. Courage is the enabling virtue. All the other virtues are empty without courage. All the other virtues are. Courage is, as they say, the testing moment for the other virtue. That's what C.S. Lewis said, the old Christian apologist. And he's right about that. And part of the problem is that you've got universities that are so corporatized and commodified and professionalized that in that context, courage is not cultivated. See, if you really want to be successful in the context of commodification, professionalization, and bureaucratization, it's conformity. That's what is rewarding. You see, and complacency, when you're silent and you know something's wrong, but you don't say anything. And that generates a cowardliness. So that cowardice becomes integral to context in which it's just about making money, gaining position, and trying to be a spectacle or keep your image alive and of a certain sort and hide the reality. And so courage has its way of being tied to truth seeking and justice seeking that rips the veil off of that which is being hidden and concealed.
Would you say our educational system purposely discourages courage?
Oh, no doubt about it. Punishes the courageous. It makes it very, very difficult.
And we're seeing that with the encampments to an extent as well.
The encampment, I mean, look at the career of Brother Norman Finkelstein, my dear brother. He's been a truth seeker and a justice seeker for 40 some years. And the academy wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole because of his books on Gaza, because of him telling the truth about Israeli occupation. And nobody has a monopoly on truth. Everybody has their own limitations and so forth. But his whole career has been courageous because he could not ever gain a foothold in the academy when it comes to acknowledging the rich humanity of Palestinian brothers and sisters, resisting Israeli occupation, Israeli apartheid, and of Israeli ethnic cleansing and now genocide against Palestinians, you see. And I just use him as one example, but there's a whole host of other examples. Paul Sweezy would be another one, the great Marxist economist who got pushed out and was told, you'll never get tenure as a Marxist at Harvard, ever. And he founded Monthly Review, which is the independent Marxist magazine. It's been going on now for almost 70 years. But they were just honest. Look, Harvard is not a place for serious truth telling when it comes to Marxists. We're not interested. You give that up, you can have this job. Well, Marxism has no monopoly on truth, but Marxism got something to say about the modern world in terms of the development of modern forms of capitalism and its tie to profit maximizing and its preoccupation with subjugating workers and subjugating nature for profit. Fossil fuel company will let the whole world go under. We just want short-term big profits for our fossil fuel companies. Well, what happens if you keep doing it and the whole ecological crisis begins to unfold? That's your problem. We just want short-term gains. See, that's capitalism in its short-term forms that lead toward destruction, really self-destruction, to tell you the truth. And thank God for the Edward Zaids and Paul Sweezy's and Bell Hooks, all of whom were in the academy at some points, but they went over against the academy. Very much so.
So taking it from education to the corporate world, as for me, somebody who was in the diversity and equity and inclusion space, but I learned very quickly it was DE&I except for Palestine.
Yes.
You said something brilliant on the Breakfast Club, I think it was. I would never use the language DE&I. No, we are talking about truth and justice. The language is wrong. We are talking about deodorized, sanitized language that conceals the funk. That conceals the funk.
That's exactly right. You ask Martin Luther King Jr., did you die for diversity? Did you die for inclusion? He'd say, are you losing your cotton picking mind? No. I died for the people I love. And I died to tell the truth about their suffering. And I died to try to make the world better so they didn't have to suffer so much. And I started on the chocolate side of town in Atlanta and Ebenezer Baptist Church and Morehouse. And I was taught to embrace all oppressed people. But when you die and when you live for something in the most concrete way, it's not for little sanitized categories like diversity. No, not at all. Not at all. The diversity is simply a bureaucratic category that's used to make sure that there is a very anemic response to white supremacy. So you're saying, well, we're going to make sure that there's some non-whites that are available for these jobs. Also, you're anti-white supremacy. You're anti-rich. Well, I wouldn't use that language. That's too funky. Let's just keep it deodorized. We just want a little inclusion, just a little inclusion here, little inclusion there. Well, that's part of the process. So it's important that we have some inclusion. It's important we have some diversity, but that's just the surface. But underneath that surface, that's where the funk is. That's where reality is. That's where the blood is. That's where the struggle is that we want to treat these people with dignity. Oh, you get red when the test comes. You really want to treat Palestinians with dignity? Well, you can start by stopping the motherfucking genocide. Pull the plug. Give up the support. Financial, military, ideological. Quit vetoing the bills in the United Nations. This is basic. We haven't even got to ending the occupation. We haven't even got to creating a state in which Palestinians can flower and flourish as human beings with dignity. Just these early steps And DEI was just an early step back in the 1970s and 80s of affirmative action and so on. But unfortunately now, you get attacks on any steps from the fascists that are escalating in the society. And so many of the centrists and the Harris is a multicultural militarist. So that militarism is part and parcel of the center of her vision. That's why in her address at the convention, what did she talk about? America must have the most lethal military in the world. What does she mean by lethal? Why did she use that language? Lethal. They used to use that language in the 50s and the 60s. They were talking about going to war with Russia. That's Cold War rhetoric of its most intense kind. Lethal. Well, that's the militarism that Martin Luther King Jr. was struggling against. And Martin said what? Militarism, racism, poverty, and materialism will ring down the curtain on American democracy. And when you look at those four, and Martin's not right about everything, but he's right about a whole lot. 800 military units around the world, 130 special operations in over 100 countries. That's the American empire. 62 cents for every dollar going to the military. Find trillions of dollars when you want to go to war, but can't find money when it comes to dealing with poverty, health care, education of high quality, or available, affordable housing, a safe neighborhood rather than highly militarized ones with cop cities now proliferating all around the country. That's the militarization at home tied to the militarization abroad. And that's what Martin King was talking about. And Sister Harris, that she's standing on the other side of that moral and spiritual divide, no matter how Black she is.
But Brother West, did you ever imagine in your lifetime you would see two candidates running for president on the platform of, I can do a better job in committing genocide?
No, I never thought I'd see that, brother. I never thought I'd see that. I saw two candidates for so long who were both supporting a barbaric apartheid in South Africa. And one was calling for constructive engagement. We would preserve it. We would just try to make sure that our hands remain pure as we interacted with it. And the other one was saying, well, someday, sooner or later, it will come down, but we can't move too quickly. Well, we saw the same thing with apartheid in the United States. That's what Jim Crow was. Martin King, what is your letter to the Birmingham jail about? The people who are telling him, Martin, you and your people are moving too fast. You're putting too much pressure on us. This is offensive to our anxieties. We just feel so bad about ourselves. What you mean? You lynched Uncle John just the other day. Oh, we know, and we're so sorry about that. We pray for John and his family, but I think you're putting too much pressure on us. This is just too much. Slow down. You can see the parallels.
Yes, indeed.
Now genocide taking place. Oh, we're working 24 hours for a ceasefire. You wouldn't even mention the word ceasefire for the first 5 months. When you finally mentioned the word ceasefire, there was no serious attempt to execute and follow through. No, because you kept providing the billions of dollars and the bombs, the 2,000-pound bombs. You kept supplying the planes. You kept supplying the bullets. Well, here we are now, 1 year later, where we're still working ceaselessly for ceasefire. Quit lying. You won't even think about what it means to defund the killing machine that has slaughtered 20,000 babies in a matter of months. Quit lying to us, Harris. Quit lying to us, Biden. Quit lying to us, the whole Democratic Party. You can't even put a Palestinian voice in your convention, but you can put ex-Trumpers, you can put Republicans in your convention. Be honest. You don't give a damn about Palestinian babies. Be candid about it. Let us know. Just like we had to be candid in the 1960s about the Klan. At least they telling us they want to kill us. You're honest about it. The other folks, no, you're moving too fast. You're putting too much pressure. Now, justice delayed is what? Justice denied. That's a truth. That's a fundamental truth. And it's a truth that applies their neighborhood and Biden and Harris and others. If their people being treated like that, they know justice delayed would be justice denied. But they think they can do it to us. No. We refuse to be silent. We will not in any way hold back our voices and our witness and our pressure and our power.
And speaking of presidential run, why did you decide to run now? Why not 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever it may be? What compelled you now?
I was convinced that Brother Bernie Sanders had the kind of following and had the kind of backbone that he could make a difference, especially when it came to Wall Street greed and poverty at home and some critique of U.S. foreign policy. Now, he was never a critic of Zionism. And he and I used to fight about this all the time because I'm a strong supporter of BDS, for example. And he thought it was one of the worst things. And we'd have debates about it. I think this is why this is the last nonviolent possibility of trying to break the back of Israeli apartheid. He was saying, oh, no, that's going to set us back. It's going to backfire. It's going to help Netanyahu and so forth. So he's never had a strong critique of American imperialism abroad. He had some gestures, but never a strong critique. But I was convinced that was the best possibility. And that's why I was behind him with Nina Turner and the others. We did almost 85 events for him, 2020 as well as 2016. But he ends up, he quickly accommodated himself to Biden. Now he's trying to bounce back and he's trying to pull, armed support, which I appreciate. And he's got a strong critique of gangster Netanyahu. I appreciate that. But I don't think that he still hasn't called it a genocide. So to me, that's a genocide denier. I mean, if you see genocide and you won't call it genocide because you're going to hurt somebody else's feelings, then you're a genocide denier.
And that means he's not sincere, though. This is my view. I just feel like he was never sincere. I believe it was a facade. I believe it was fake. How could you not call this a genocide? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
I've known him, so I think he's got a sincerity when it comes to the working class in the United States. He's got a sincerity, his critiques of Wall Street greed and so forth. But it took him so long to even use the word ceasefire.
Yeah.
Took him a good while. It was pathetic. And that's what I've said over and over again. You see, it was just pathetic. So I hear what you're saying. You're saying the sincerity vis-a-vis Palestinians.
Yes.
Absolutely. No, I hear what you're saying there. But sincerity in terms of supporting the working class at home and so on, he's got a deep sincerity there. But everybody wrestles with this on their own terms, and we have to just be critical and self-critical. Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. Just like your friend, to come back to the brother. I mean, I'm sure that he's anti-genocide. I'm sure that he knows that Harris is wrong. He just overlooks her cowardliness in order to have his own racial solidarity with her. But in the end, he knows she's wrong.
Yeah.
He really does.
Yeah. So why, just kind of going back to the question, why now? Why is it time for you to run?
Oh yeah, because I didn't see any voices that were trying to keep alive the great tradition that produced me, which is a Black freedom tradition. I just didn't see any voices. I wanted to make sure that there were both voices. There were organizations that were both in place, had been in place for a while, could be strengthened, that could bring some power and pressure to bear on the status quo, and that young people can look at and say, oh, everybody didn't sell out. Because we live at a time in which everybody's for sale. Everything is for sale. Everybody's for sale. And they say, oh, Lord, Brother Ed didn't sell out. Brother West didn't sell out. They could have been wrong on these things or right on this, but they didn't sell out. They held on to something precious that had been bequeathed and transmitted to them by those who came before. Zaid didn't sell out. Chomsky didn't sell out. Chris Hedges didn't sell out. They tried to tell the truth about these things. And they tried to do something about it. And when I looked up electoral politics and saw who was running, I said, oh my God, I got to run for justice. And Jesus in this context, which made now is going to be strange, because I've said on many occasions, I would be in the crack house before I'd be in the White House. Because the crack house is a place where people who high sensitivity have given into addiction. Right. Whereas the White House is a place of legalized bribery and corruption. So say, Brother West, you said you've been in the crack house rather than the White House. That mean you in the crack house now on your way to the White House? So, no. I just said that, in fact, in that moment, I was characterizing the White House as just site of imperial corruption. It still is. And I've said with my beloved wife at the heat of that in winning, we wouldn't move into the White House till everybody has a house. Because I'm against homelessness. I'm against unhousedness. Just by example, you see.
And speaking of Anahita and your team, I don't want to get in trouble here, so I'm just going to ask a few more questions.
All right.
If you're okay with that.
She thinks highly of you, and she salutes you just like I do, my brother. I appreciate that.
I appreciate that. I did have Jill Stein on a few months ago, and I asked her, would you ever welcome Brother West on the ticket? So I want to pose the same question to you. Would you ever welcome her on your ticket or some sort of combined ticket, whether president or VP, give or take?
Well, I think we all need to be part of the United Front against fascism, United Front against genocide, imperialism, and so forth. But no, I was with the Green Party for a while, and they were very kind initially. There's no doubt about that. But when I got a close look, though, brother, I really didn't like what I saw. There was too much dishonesty and disrespect going on, especially in regard to my wife. And I have very little patience with that kind of thing, especially for Black folk, people of color. And so there's some magnificent people in the Green Party. There's no doubt about that. And I agree with most of their platform. But in terms of my personal interactions, I didn't like it at all. The arrogance and the condescension and so on, you see. And so in that regard, I find myself in a situation that, objectively speaking, in terms of policy, I'm with them most of the way. In terms of issues of integrity, honesty, I didn't like it at all. Secondly, I've always felt that the Black freedom struggle really needs to be at the center of efforts in the U.S. empire to bring critique to bear on that empire here and abroad. And the Green Party has never viewed the Black freedom struggle as central. It just hasn't. Its history is different. And that's fine, but it is what it is. And that's true for Sister Jill, too. That her policies are anti-racist and so forth, absolutely. But her and her party, they don't come out of Black freedom struggle. You see, so that when it comes to mass incarceration, when it comes to police murder and brutalization, when it comes to histories of lynching and all that, it just doesn't have a lot of weight. They're against it, but it just doesn't have a lot of weight. And it is what it is. And so that was one of the reasons why I told them that I was critical. And also, in addition, when it comes to religion, it was a challenge because I am an unabashed revolutionary Christian. I'm a Jesus-loving free Black man, and I don't apologize for my religion. Whereas the Green Party is profoundly secular, and they're not used to having religious folk and religious leaders. It's alien to them, which is fine. Secular brothers and sisters make magnificent contributions, but I'm not a secular brother at all. I'm a religious, like my skin. It's been shaped and molded me, you see. So that the very notion in so many of those contexts where I had to apologize and account for this and that. Why you talking about Jesus? What Christianity, Muslim, Islam got to do with anything? Hey, wait. I don't mind having a conversation. I don't mind trying to engage, but don't come at me at that level.
Yeah.
Or you come out of a different world than I do. You come out of a different cultural matrix than I do, you see. And I respect the secular matrix, and I've learned a lot from secular brothers and sisters, but I don't go about imposing my Christianity, but I also don't feel as if my Christianity makes me some kind of, defective so-and-so has to account for these crazy right-wing evangelicals and so forth. And the same is true in the Islamic world. You got Muslims who are just out of control in terms of supporting domination and so forth and so on. You know, I'm with the young sisters in Iran against the Iranian elites not treating them right. But I'm glad Iran also supports the Palestinians too. I can think both at the same time. I can be critical of Iran and still appreciate their support. Mandela had the same challenge with the Soviet Union. He didn't support the Soviet Union's forms of repression, but the Soviet Union supported his movement. He was able to have both. You have to be able to tell the full truth, practical as well as ideological. And in that sense, I'm not on anybody's plantation. Anybody's. Green Party plantation, Democratic Party plantation, Republican Party plantation. I'm not even on the church plantation. Because there's so many churches that say, Brother West, you're not really a Christian because you out here fighting so. Oh, really? And I can imagine Muslims telling Malcolm X, you're not really a good Muslim because you're not following the rules that we put forward. Our relation to Allah is what it is. It's rich and deep. And I'm doing the will of Allah, but I'm not agreeing with what leaders of the mosque always say. Well, that's a conversation that must go on, but we had to be honest and candid about our callings. So that's why, when I hear talk about this, and of course, I'm never, ever going to give up Sister Melina Abdullah, who's my dear running mate. The idea that somehow I would leave her and get on Jill Stein's ticket and be her VP. Oh, my God, get off the crack pipe, my dear sister Jam. That Green Party force for good a lot of different ways, but I can't take that kind of arrogance and condescension again.
Yeah. Any final words you'd like to share with the audience, with the youth? Any words of inspiration or hope?
Well, I just want to tell folk we're living in an unprecedented moment of grimness and dimness, and I want to make sure that they remain encouraged, remain full of courage, and try to encourage others, because we have to be able to sustain our resilience, resistance, a sense of hope in a moment of overwhelming grimness and dimness, and the fact that this too shall pass. There's going to be breakthroughs, and the breakthroughs will be real enough to be able to help sustain us as we continue through. But let's just remain tied to our commitments in our own fallible ways, truth and justice and love, my brother.
I appreciate you, Brother West. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much indeed. Salute you, though, man.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
All right. No.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumud.